To do is I had just very briefly started. I'd introduce myself, so I might just get people to introduce themselves, and then we'll come back to the opening.
Nicolette Buller, Federal Member for Bradfield.
Thank you.
Sarah Flegel, Deputy Chair, Member for Warringah.
Emma Coleman, Member for Petrie.
Tom French, Member for Moore.
Colin Boyce, Member for Flynn.
Great. Carol. Thank you. So I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. I also extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people joining us today. In accordance with the committee's resolution, this hearing will be broadcast on the Parliament's website, and the proof and official transcripts of proceedings will also be published on the Parliament's website. I remind all present that as Chair I will ensure that proceedings are conducted in an orderly, respectful and courteous way. Those present here today are advised that filming and recording are permitted during the hearing. I remind members of the media, if they're here, who may be present or listening on the web, of the need to fairly and accurately report the proceedings of the committee. I now welcome representatives from the Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water to give evidence for the Hansard record. Can't get my words out. Would you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear before the committee?
Thanks, Chair. James Tregurtha, Head of Division Circular Economy in the Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water.
Thank you, Chair. Cameron Hutchison, Branch Head for Packaging, Stewardship and Investment Branch in the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water.
Thank you. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that these hearings are formal proceedings of the Parliament. Consequently, they warrant the same respect as proceedings of the Parliament itself. Giving false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as contempt of Parliament. I now invite you to make a brief opening statement or statements before we proceed to discussion. So do you
thanks,
wish
Chair. I don't have an opening statement.
Great. Mr Hutchison, you don't have one either? Great. Okay, well then we might go straight to questions. So I might go to the Deputy Chair first. Do you have any questions?
Sorry, no.
Okay. Ms Comer?
So is it like the industry in recycling solar panels? So obviously Queensland's leading the world in rooftop solar, and there's about a 25-30 year life. And so that's coming to the end of term. What do you think are some of the limitations within the industry of solar panel recycling?
I might kick off and then my colleague might want to add to what I say. I expect he will. So from our perspective, and you'll be aware the Commonwealth is in the process of establishing a pilot around solar panel recycling. One of the big limitations from our perspective is the logistical challenge of collection and movement of solar panels from in situ to recycling facilities. They're heavy, they can break if they're not handled properly. If they break, they are less able to be recycled due to the shards of glass, and so getting intact panels from in situ to a recycling facility in a way that maintains their recyclability is, from our perspective, one of the key challenges, which is why the Commonwealth's invested in the pilot. Yeah. Do you want to add anything? Yeah,
and it's just to the premise of the question as well. So yes, you mentioned Queensland in its uptake. Australia, in a global context, is a leader in solar uptake. In part through government schemes that have supported the uptake of solar. So they've been successful in that regard. We think at the end of last year, around 60,000 tonnes of solar panels in Australia reached their end of life, and that, on our current projections, could end up being around 90,000 tonnes by 2030. There's some industry work there, though, that starts to bring that number into question as maybe a bit of an underestimate, because some of that is predicated on the fact that we think solar panels are used for around 20 years. We are seeing, with the emergence of new technology, better panels, their life is shortening, so people are replacing them more quickly. So that's exactly why the government's acted to establish this pilot, because the problem is there and known, and possibly even bigger than we anticipate. But as Mr Tregurtha said, a lot of the challenges are around the logistics of them, getting them to the right places in the right condition. We understand that if in the right conditions with the right systems, about 90% of a panel can be recyclable. So there are good outcomes possible, but we need to do more work to understand how we could set that system up in Australia and support that system, because it's pretty nascent at the moment.
Just to follow up on that, so my understanding is, so the current solar panels that are out on most people's rooftops, the older sort of ones from earlier this century, they're about 99.99% pure silica, but now my understanding is the newer technology is 99.9999% pure. So the silica is quite, like with the recycling of that silica, is there any way to reuse that? Because my understanding is it's not up to scratch to be used in the newer generation of solar panels.
So I don't think we'd be looking, like, we're sort of destination agnostic, if I can put it that way. So I don't, it's not a issue for us where the silica or the silver or the copper or the tin that is extracted from old panels gets reused. It could go into copper pipes, it could go into the demand for silver particularly is consistently quite high these days with a lot of advanced electronics, and for gold as well, which you do get out of some panels. So from our perspective, it's not about turning old panels into new panels, it's about making the resource streams from old panels available to the market, and then presumably the resources will flow to where they have the highest value.
Okay, I might go to Ms Buller and then I'll go to Mr Repicoli and then Mr Boyce, if you have any. Thank you.
I know the terms of reference are about the recyclability of these products. My question is a little bit like we're going to go forward 20 or 30 years. It's more about the upstream part or extended producer responsibility. Is it in the remit of the department to look upstream around solutions around EPR? And if so, given that almost 100% of product is imported, do we have what it takes from an institutional perspective to introduce EPR as well as deal with this current batch of rooftop solar that will need to be recycled or disposed of?
So it's totally within our remit, where, of course, I mean, it's, I think I've said across the divide, or however you refer to it up here, that we are already looking at EPR in relation to packaging. The Recycling and Waste Recovery Act provides for both co-regulatory and mandatory product stewardship arrangements. So we have a regulatory tool. You'd be aware of the National Television and Computer Recycling Scheme, which is a co-regulatory arrangement where producers fund that scheme. So if the government was of a mind, there would be so we would have, if you like, the capacity from a policy perspective, and the government would have the capacity, if it chose to, from a regulatory perspective, to look at how solar panel recycling was managed into the future. So right now, we're, of course, as we've just said, implementing the current decision of government, which is to the pilot, which is around helping identify the issues that are preventing the greater uptake of recycling, just because of the value of the, so the one difference I'd say about, well, something like solar panels is that a lot of the material in solar panels is highly valuable, as opposed to, if I put my other hat on in terms of plastics and packaging, or even tyres, which we were talking about a few weeks ago, there's less valuable material in those that can help fund the end of life treatment. So for us, before we jump straight into any sort of policy or regulatory response, including in our advice to government, we would want to do the work to understand both the system and the market to ensure that that advice, that for example, an EPR scheme was an appropriate response under those circumstances.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
You're on that.
Thank you, Chair. This pilot is over 3 years and it's $24.7 million. Can you let us know where it's up to so far? And could you also, is there anywhere else around the world that is doing great work in this space? Is there any other jurisdictions? Because if there's already other groups doing it, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We could just continue to work with that wheel and make it a bit better.
Thanks for the question. So yes, we've got $24.7 million over 3 years for the pilot. It's at the early stages. We are in the middle at the moment of a procurement process, so we've got a procurement through the government's AusTender arrangements to actually engage a pilot administrator, so an organisation or consortia of organisations to run the pilot for us. That approach to market opened last week on the 26th of March and will be opened on the 24th of April. And we're similarly doing an industry briefing with interested stakeholders and potential applicants through that on the 9th of April. We anticipate that we would have the pilot up and running this side of the end of the financial year. And from there, we expect the pilot to run for around 12 to 18 months, where we're really extracting the data and the learnings to help us inform whether it's our product stewardship approach, the work we're doing with other states and territories, the work led by New South Wales as well. In terms of your question around international examples, I think we're really at the forefront of this. Australia is a leader in the uptake of solar. We do see ourselves as having the skills and capabilities to actually look at this recycling problem. So I don't think that there are, we have looked, there are, I think, examples elsewhere around the world where we can kind of plug and play. That's why this pilot's going to be so important to help us learn from it.
I might also add that a number of other sort of countries who are probably further down the road in terms of solar panel use and recycling, for example, some of the countries in Europe have much different geographic challenges to what we see in Australia, particularly in Queensland and Western Australia, where you've got those long distances and logistical challenges that just add cost into the chain, as I was saying earlier, the chain from in situ to recycling facility.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Boyce, do you have any questions?
Yeah, so I don't know who to direct my question to. Obviously, any of these programs are based on economics. How much does it cost to recycle versus how much do you gain by recycling that product, whatever it is? I know, for an example, right now, many of the steel recyclers are not doing it because of the simple fact of the matter, it costs more money to cart the recycled steel than what they get for it, so they've literally stopped business with the current situation. So have you got any numbers around what it might cost to gather the material, and in this case panels, and then put them through the process of recycling versus what you might get from an economic point of view out the other end?
So that's exactly what the pilot
I'm
is
well aware of that.
designed
So have you got any
it's
projections on
generate?
that?
I don't know if we've got any.
We don't. I know New South Wales has done some work on behalf of energy ministers, so work that was commissioned in August last year by energy ministers. New South Wales has done some work that looks at the potential benefits of setting up a product stewardship scheme, and I'm just trying to see if I can put my hands on that figure for you, which goes to the potential scale of the benefit of us getting a system in place versus the costs of collecting these things. But I'll see if I can grab that.
I should also add that the other factor which is variable in this is the degree to which there is, for want of a better term, virgin supply and at a price that is more competitive than the recycled product. So you mentioned in your example of steel that the if you like, the market demand for recycled steel is also a function of the availability and price of imported steel coming into the country as well. And so if the market gets to a point, now don't get me wrong, I know there's issues around price in both those equations, but I guess the viability, what we're finding in terms of all the products that we're looking at in terms of their recyclability and their availability, one of the key considerations is end market, which is where your question was going. Those end market questions are both a function of the cost of recycling, but also a function of the availability of the virgin product as a replacement.
Yeah. If I might just have a supplementary, Madam Chair. In my notes here, it says the above evidence suggests panels end of life sooner than expected due to increasing efficiency and decreasing price for new panels. That doesn't make sense to me. Why would a panel end its life sooner if it was more efficient than the old one?
So my understanding of what that is trying to say, it's the increased efficiency of the new panels coming onto the market. So it's people moving away from the existing panel and moving to a to a more attractive, a more efficient panel, and so that's why they're decommissioning them sooner than what the projected lifespan of the initial panel was. And that was, in my earlier evidence, pointed to the analysis where we think some 90,000 tonnes will be coming off roofs by around, I think it was 2030. That could be a conservative figure because that was based on an assumption that we think panels have about a 20 to 25 year lifespan. But what we're seeing through the Queensland work is people are actually starting to replace them a lot sooner because the tech's moving faster. People want the more efficient panel on the roof.
And they're quite like, so even over a period, let's say of the last 5 to 10 years, your top end panel 5 or 10 years ago would have been 330 kilowatts. It's now 450. So it's like 25% better and it's cheaper. And so as people upgrade their systems, they are looking for those opportunities that Mr. Hutchison was talking about. And the reason it's cheaper is effectively economies of scale because of the vast scaling up of production, particularly across some Asian nations. So the price is going down, the capacity goes up, and as people seek to, I guess, self-supply more of their own electricity off their own roofs, or in the case of a commercial venture, how do you improve your bottom line by getting those more efficient panels that will generate more power for a cheaper, for a cheaper investment in terms of your capital.
All right, so that business model that is built into the production of solar panels is actually acting as a negative in respect to trying to recycle the product at the end of life. So the analogy that I like to use is the humble fridge, which everybody has. And when our fridge breaks down, the compressor doesn't work, and you go down to the fridge mechanic and he says you need a new compressor and it costs X and it'll cost Y to install it, but then you figure out a new fridge is cheaper than having the old one repaired.
Yep.
Same analogy, is that not so?
That's exactly right. Not only cheaper than having it repaired in the case of your fridge, but also cheaper to run over its lifespan. So there's an additional benefit. It's not just in terms of the outlay, it's also in terms of the running cost over its life. So yes, that analogy would hold for solar panels too.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sorry.
Can I just go to Mr French, then I'll come to Ms Steggall, and then I'll come back to Mr Kennedy. Yep.
I just want to ask a couple of questions around incentives. So we addressed incentives yet? So what incentives in the Australian rooftop solar market influence people to install or replace solar panels in ways that shorten the system life and create more waste?
Well, so there'd be a range of things. So the first is if people... price isn't always an incentive. And what I mean by that is if the cost of their electricity increases, particularly in scenarios where they can see that there's value in, well, they have the capacity, rooftop space. So I'm talking about consumers, like retail market now. That would drive, that's clearly an incentive for uptake and replacement. Also, if people are making changes to their system, so an existing system, what we're finding is where people are changing their existing system, they're often upgrading the entire thing, even though part of that system is still viable. So, for example, if let's say you have an inverter and your inverter breaks and needs replacement, a lot of companies are offering, well, you could just replace the inverter and we can get one of those, which is quite expensive, or we can give you a brand new inverter plus these great new schmick solar panels and it's all integrated.
Yeah.
So we'll take the old ones off your roof, put the new ones on, you'll see better performance, and the margin, like the additionality, good for the producer because they're getting a higher sale, but also good for the consumer because that additionality is more than offset by the better performance that then reduces their electricity bill. So back to price. Another driver in that space would be if people, similarly, if your inverter's fine but you're putting in place a battery. So often we're seeing people saying, well, now you're putting in a battery, you want to keep your battery as full as possible. So you need, the recommendation from many producers, retailers would be to increase your capacity because that keeps your battery more full. Again, you're back to lower bills. So there's those incentives across the board are sort of the sorts of things that are driving it from a consumer perspective. And again, as I was saying in answer to an earlier question, from a commercial perspective, it's just getting the best bang for your buck. And we're sure that those commercial operators of larger solar installations, now they would have depreciation and maintenance schedules built in, but if there was a point at which the price differential on a panel that was 25-30% more efficient, you can see there's a point at which you look at the numbers and go, actually, we should start changing our panels now because we can derive greater value. Did you want to add anything?
I've got a couple of follow-up questions just around that, Chair. So just around that decommissioning, so is there a national data set exists to track the solar panel decommissioning, reuse, recycling and landfill outcomes? Is any national data set?
Short answer, no, and that's absolutely where the pilot's looking to step in and start to build that data set for us.
So the follow-up to that, so in the absence of this sort of mandatory reporting, how confident has the department been with its current waste projections?
So the current waste projections are built on what we understand. It's derived from industry data at the moment, and
so
from the experience.
Self-reporting.
Yeah, but also from the work that the Queensland and the New South Wales governments have been doing. So some of them are from government sources, but at a federal level, we haven't got a national picture at the moment. But that's one of the primary outcomes from this pilot is to improve our data and understanding, because I think we acknowledge from the outset we wouldn't get the quality of information that we need to help government make these decisions through things like surveys.
Yeah, and then just one more question there, Chair, is what proportion of the panels removed are still functional at the time of decommissioning? Is there any reporting on that?
We don't, like Mr. Hutchison was saying, we don't have those numbers or that data, but I think it's reasonable, our anecdotally and from feedback from industry in states and territories, quite a few of them are. That goes to this early replacement, like because they have lives of, generally should have lives of somewhere around 20 to, we're seeing 30 years. There are examples of 40 years plus, but they're unusual. So unless things like hailstorms happen, generally they should keep producing. And what we are seeing is, it's rare we're not seeing any evidence probably at all, or if we are seeing it, it's minimal of people reusing those panels in other installations. What we are seeing is people upgrading but keeping their old panels and maintaining them on the other side of their roof. So, for example, if you've got your best solar gain, you'll put your highest producing panels there. But what we're seeing is some consumers move the existing panels to the other side of the roof. They'll still get some return on them. They're still viable, and plug them in and just sort of cover as much of their roof as they can, if I can put it that way. So we are seeing limited examples of reuse, but generally what we're finding is once the panels come off the roofs and are taken into a stream of disposal, the reuse proposition is probably uneconomic given the amount of testing, maintenance that you would have to do, because people have suggested things like using them for community housing or for facilities, voluntary organisations, scout halls, those sorts of things. The issue there is one of making sure they're safe, because you are then taking a whole system apart and putting it back together somewhere else, and it's a system which generates electricity. So
I'm a Sparky, so
there you
I understand this.
It's a little bit follow on from this. How is the technology advancing in being able to identify the effectiveness of particular panels within an array, so that, for example, if an ageing array is not performing as well as liked, to avoid people swapping out early because of performance, how many companies or technology is there around testing the effectiveness of individual panels and being able to bypass or only replace faulty ones rather than a whole array?
So thanks for the question. I've just done that on my own house. So it literally 3 weeks ago. So the system we happen to have, and it's just happenstance, has each panel has a micro inverter attached to it. So the readout you get, you can see all of the panels, and one of them was faulty and underperforming. So the technology is totally there now, is the point I'm sort of in terms of answering that question. And increasingly, I think providers are realising that there is benefit in being able to understand what each panel is generating. The benefit in setting up a solar panel array like that is that if you set up solar panels in a string, and again, the technology is moving on, but historically, the string would only generate at the capacity of the lowest producing panel, whereas if you hook up each panel individually, then they all generate at their maximum possible potential.
Yeah.
So
Isn't it also, for example, if one panel in an array was shaded, the whole thing underperforms?
That's what I'm saying.
Unless
that's exactly
you can
what I'm saying.
bypass it. But
That's
there is
exactly.
now technology you can, I think, install a bypass for that to
Well, you
ensure
can-
that they all work individually.
Correct. And
So-
that's increasingly what's being promoted by a number of companies, not all of them. I mean, setting up a string is probably still slightly cheaper. So if you had a piece of roof that was in full sun all the time, you wouldn't necessarily use that money. But if half your roof is shaded, there's an opportunity to do exactly what you're talking about, which is to look at them individually.
So obviously there's a bit of a perverse incentive, right, for the companies for them, it's easier to sell the customer a whole new array and say, look, take your set off early, you can get some newer ones, there's rebates, here we go. So to avoid that perverse incentive of rolling panels over too soon, is there, I guess it's the department looking at having those specific adaptations supported, or encouraging the use of that to avoid that early decommissioning?
Yeah, so that's not part of the pilot, because the pilot is really about, as I was saying earlier, about that once the solar panel's taken off, how do we get from in situ at the residence or at the facility to the recycling and get it fully recycled. So that's not part of our consideration at the moment. Certainly.
But do you accept, for some companies, there's a bit of a perverse disincentive for them to say, rather than try and increase the capacity of what you've already got or improve, one or two panels, it's easier from us to sell you a whole new set.
Yeah. So I guess what I'd say, so we haven't had discussions like that with companies, and indeed you're sort of in the space now where, my colleagues from the climate change and energy side of the portfolio are not here with us. But certainly it's about at what point, so there may have been some work done on that, which I'd be happy to find out and come back to the committee on.
If you could take that on notice.
Take that. We can absolutely take that one on notice. But the broader point I'd say is, if you think about a commercial installation, it's for them understanding what every single panel is doing is beneficial, and in fact replacing out the ones that are lower producing, they would, I'd be surprised if they're, and again, I can't speak to that specifically, but I would be surprised if they're not already doing that, given that the technology already exists where you can say that panel's underperforming, let's get that one off and get a new one on as quickly as we can, because you want to maximise the value of your sort of ground space in terms of generation.
Okay, I'm going to go to Mr Kennedy now. Just want to make sure everyone gets an opportunity.
I've just been looking at
Got you next.
some materials from UNSW, I think Dr Deng, and some stuff from your department as well. And it's suggesting, tell me if this is roughly right, recycling a panel, you can get sort of roughly $20 worth of value, and the cost is roughly $20. So it's break even. It could be close to break even before you account for transport and logistics and everything else. Is that sort of ballpark rough from what's out there?
We would basically just have to rely on that New South Wales, University of New South Wales data at the moment. So from my perspective, if they're the numbers that are in the report, then we'd have no reason to doubt that.
And then I guess the question I have is, well, then if there's a gap, and it's apparently they're saying it's $2 to put them in landfill. If there's a gap between what the value you get out and recycling it, how do we fill that gap? What's the mechanism? Have you guys thought through that? What's the best mechanism to fill that gap to recycle? Are you putting a levy on the people who import solar panels? Is it a straight tax subsidy? How are you thinking about that?
There's a range of options, and a couple you've just mentioned, and certainly from our perspective, and this goes back to the question about extended producer responsibility earlier, like is it a case that we regulate and prevent them going to landfill and require solar panel importers to pay that cost, and then the degree to which they can either absorb that and or pass it on to the consumer is a question of the supply and demand and the willingness of the market to wear that cost in terms of their sales. So there are levy opportunities, tax opportunities, regulatory opportunities around enforcing extended producer responsibilities or other. The states, I know, are thinking about the degree to which they're prepared to continue to accept solar panels into their landfills because they're big and they're heavy and they take up a lot of room. So from a state landfill operator perspective, if there isn't a solution to solar panel recycling, and if we're seeing the volumes that Mr. Hutchison was talking about earlier coming off roofs, that potentially creates a big, I was going to say big hole, but it's the opposite, creates a big load going into your landfill. That would otherwise. So there's a range of options. We're looking at all of them, and we're looking at all of them in the context of all of the different product streams that we're looking at.
So is it a fair characterisation to say we've got an environmental externality with solar panels that's not appropriately priced, and the public is just paying for this, you know, through environmental damage or others, and we need to find a way to price this externality?
You could, yes, and that's totally fair, and it's exactly the same argument. You can use it for plastic, you can use it for batteries, you can use it for solar panels, frankly, food, that is exactly the issue that we confront nationally across all product streams, is the issue of the a set of environmental externalities that are not being priced in to the market. Now, where that incidence of cost hits across the market depends on the products you're talking about, but absolutely.
And this, when we do appropriately price it, or if we do appropriately price it, it's likely to add cost to the product. Well,
it depends on, I wouldn't go that far. It depends on the product and it depends on the market. So could, and of course, if you're a producer or a wholesaler, you'd be looking to pass those costs on. But again, it depends on the market and the profit margins, and you're sort of getting into a space which I'm not an expert in.
And then last question for me: do you have concerns about and I'm not really across this, as it fills landfill, what are the environmental concerns you have if this is sort of left unchecked? And is there toxicity and etc.? Can you just
absolutely? So yes, so leaching. So the problem you've got largely the problem with landfills is that I mean it's sort of low cost, as you've already said, but the constituent parts of a solar panel have some potentially quite toxic materials in them, which if they had to leach into groundwater, water flows. I mean, that's large, particularly in older landfills that aren't properly sealed. What you find is a lot of leachate. You also find in emissions, like landfills probably less of a problem here. I'm sorry, solar panels less of a problem from an emissions profile perspective, but it still is a problem. The other problems the states would say to you is if people are trying to chuck away solar panels, you get broken glass everywhere. It's heavy, so it can fill up. And then, of course, beyond the environment, there's also clearly a workplace health and safety issue that's another part of the pilot, is to look at the transmission of a product that is designed to produce as much electricity as possible also generates some risk around handling that we want to make sure we've taken into account, including if they're left, like you can just, like if I sort of reflect on children, particularly in country areas where landfills are pretty accessible. I remember standing on landfills, seeing what I could find, but you can sort of paint a not very rosy picture of what could potentially happen in those circumstances. So we're live to that. So it's, from our perspective, we're the environment portfolio, so that's our primary motivation, but there's absolutely some other issues around workplace health and safety more broadly.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Ms. Berry. Oh, sorry, Mr. Hutchison.
If I can just add to that response, because it'll help me clean up a thread I had with Mr. Boyce earlier, and for the committee's benefit update, my answer from earlier. So And as Mr Tregurth was saying, it'll depend on the value of the products that come out of the back end of a scheme as to, the potential costs of running a scheme. So we're talking about some pretty valuable materials in, silver, gold, silicon, copper and the like. And, if they've got a value and they can be recycled and captured, that could offset the costs that could hit at the front end too. But it was some work that I attributed to New South Wales earlier. It's actually work that our portfolio did back in 2023 when we were looking at e-waste stewardship more broadly and going to the potential, environmental and net economic costs of, taking a product stewardship approach on panels. Some of that really early analysis suggested that benefit could be as big, a net benefit could be as big as $7.2 billion in the Australian context. Now, we would want to run that modelling or run that ruler over, whatever the settings and parameters of a scheme that we might explore, and that was work done some years ago. But as we move through this pilot process, our early sense is based on, the industry numbers that we have, the scale of the problem, but also the value of the product and the harms that we stand to prevent from stopping the leaching, the illegal dumping and the like, there is pretty significant benefits there to be realised.
Great. I'm going to go to Ms Berry, who's going to wrap up for us. I've got some questions, but I'll put them on notice because we're going to run out of time. We do need to have a very quick private meeting at the end. So.
Okay. So, yes, I've got a few things. Apologies if we covered previous ground here, but in essence, we've established the pilot that's going to look at 100 collection sites nationwide and recycle potentially up to 250,000 solar panels. So you're really getting into a very practical pilot. But you also talk in your submission about the development of a product stewardship scheme, which I imagine you're looking to address a couple of issues which you've referred to in your submission, principally that you think that there should be national standards, or that it would be helpful to have national standards in relation to the management of solar waste, but also national standards in relation to the installation of used panels. Do you see this pilot addressing those points of national consistency as well? Is that one of your objectives?
So initially, I think the primary objective of the pilot is to help us understand the post-decommissioning phase, so how panels can be handled across those sites, and how we can get them to recycling facilities, as Mr Tregurth has indicated, so that they're in good shape and we can realise the best value out of them. In terms of some of those other product stewardship outcomes, how we might look at reuse and that is work that we will do in parallel, and it's also work that we'll take forward that we've been charged to by environment ministers. New South Wales has been doing some work around regulatory impact statements and how we could, and when I say we, how we collectively in Australia might want to approach stewardship. So we see them as two streams, but two very well connected streams, where the pilot's using its data to inform those considerations around stewardship outcomes.
And just a follow-up question, if I could.
Yeah, sure.
So when I'm not going to call myself an expert, but having a look at what happens internationally, it appears that unless you've got a good regulatory regime whereby you compel the market to engage in certain recycling activities, that it's going to be difficult to have this just the market, spring to life. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I think that's right, and that's something that we are looking at and actively exploring as part of this. So when we say we're exploring product stewardship options and what options are there for the government, that includes regulatory measures to make sure that those systems can function and that market failures or gaps can be plugged. So they're options that are on the table.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So can I thank you both for your attendance here today. I think you've been asked to provide some additional information, and I will get you my questions as well.
Thank you,
if you can forward them to the Secretariat. Also, you'll be sent a copy of the transcript, so if there's any required corrections in that, please do that through the Secretariat. And I now declare this public hearing closed, and we will have a private meeting just after this.
Thank you.